Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
While the police and the investigators were trying to collect as much information they could on Casey Anthony and where the whereabouts of Kaylee Anthony was, Jose Baez was trying to petition Judge Stan Strickland on trying to convince him to let Casey be released on bail. Because prior, Judge Strickland would honor Detective Yuri Malik's petition that Casey Anthony be put on a no bond status. And Jose Baez would be able to convince Judge Strickland to actually change his mind and put her on a bail bond. And he would actually set her bail at $500,000. Now, once Casey would hear this news, she would be completely confident that her parents, George and Cindy Anthony, would let her come home and post her bail. But her parents would not be as welcoming about the bail idea as she had hoped. In fact, George and Cindy Anthony would tell Casey that they were going to stick to their guns and refuse to post her bail, and would say that a little bit more time in prison might loosen her lips until she would grasp the seriousness of the situation and finally come to terms and try to help find Kaylee, or at least tell people where Kaylee was. Also keep in mind that around this time, George and Cindy Anthony did not know what investigators had found inside the trunk of Casey's car. So at this point in time, they were fully confident that Kaylee was still alive and were doing everything in their power to help find Kaylee Anthony. They were so confident that Kaylee was still alive that they were continuing doing these news interviews every single day. And when they weren't on news interviews, they were spending the rest of their time handing out help wanted flyers to whoever would take them, trying to find their lost granddaughter. And because they were doing this every single day, the media was starting to create this frenzy where people around the world were having their heart broke trying to find this little girl. So since her parents would refuse to post her bail, Casey Anthony would just assume that she would have to sit in prison until her trial. But then something unexpected would happen. A bounty hunter from Sacramento, Leonard Padilla, would actually fly from Sacramento to Orlando to actually post the 10% bail bond for Casey Anthony. How he would learn about this he would be sitting at home in Sacramento and would be watching the news where George and Cindy Anthony would be on there talking about trying to find their lost granddaughter, Kaylee Anthony. And even though George and Cindy did not want their daughter out of prison, he would think that if he flew down to Orlando and posted her bail, that a little bit of freedom might loosen her lips and actually be more willing to talk about the whereabouts of Kaylee. Now, once George and Cindy found out about Padilla posting Casey's bail, they would be more willing to let her come home, knowing that she would have an ankle bracelet or an ankle monitor around her foot. But Casey would again run into some bad luck, where not even 9 days after getting out of prison, she would be charged again by her former friend, Amy Huizenga, who would actually press charges against Casey for forging checks in her name. So not even 9 days of being out of prison, Casey would find herself back in prison. Now, knowing that Casey had had a taste of freedom, the police would try to take advantage of this, and they would give Casey a plea deal. And in this plea deal, they would give her certain immunities against the charges that were already set against her, and would not press charges on the lying to police charge if she could at least tell police where Kaylee was. Now, most people would jump at this because it would seem that the police were actually trying to drop most of the charges, but Casey would refuse to take the plea deal. And because this particular case was getting so much media coverage, there would be a shift of emotions from the people who had been watching about Kaylee. Up until this point, the entire world and America were completely heartbroken, not only for George and Cindy, but also Casey in trying to find her daughter. But something would happen at this point that would change everything. The interview footage and the prison footage would actually be leaked to the media. So now the entire world could actually see what the investigators saw when Yuri Malik was questioning her about the whereabouts of Kaylee. And the phone conversations between Casey and her parents would be leaked, showing how she was treating her parents while she was in prison. This would take the more sympathetic people watching Casey Anthony turned to straight outrage. From the investigators' point of view, they saw that Casey Anthony was just this cold, heartless mother that didn't care if her daughter was found. And the phone calls would show Casey Anthony as a spoiled brat that would be screaming at their visibly upset parents, whose only concern was finding their granddaughter. And these protesters would quickly give Casey Anthony a name that she would unfortunately keep to this day as the worst mother in America. Jose Baez would actually petition to Judge Stan Strickland to urge that a lot of these documents and records be dropped and kept from the general public, as it was very damning to her case, and trying to find a unbiased juror would actually be very difficult, which Stan Strickland would actually deny, because he would say that these posts of the investigation and these phone calls were of great public interest. And it's around this time that George and Cindy Anthony would completely jump ship from wanting to find Kaylee to standing behind Casey. And this sudden change of jumping ship would not only take all the hatred on Casey Anthony, but now this entire group of protesters not only hated Casey, but had similar and, if not the same, hate for George and Cindy. George and Cindy would agree to go to the prison and actually post Casey's bail. And it's around this time the police would have to surround themselves in the Anthony home, because their home was being completely bombarded by angry protesters, where these protesters would not only throw trash cans at their home, but also write them unalive threats. And these threats would go to extreme measures, to the point of even going as far as saying that they would break into the Anthony home and take care of Casey themselves. And because of the mounting angry protesters that would not only surround the Anthony home, but just be around everywhere, George Anthony would actually not only hire a public spokesperson to speak out about what the family's plans were during this case and trial, he would also hire private investigator Dominic Casey to find out more information that the police weren't finding out. And private investigator Dominic Casey will become very important later on down the road. And because they had not found Kaylee Anthony yet, the police would actually charge Casey with murder. And because the police had not found Kaylee Anthony, they would quickly charge Casey for murder, which she would plead not guilty. After only being missing for almost 6 months, the police would finally find Kaylee Anthony. On December 11th, 2008, meter worker Roy Crunk would actually be working near a wooded area about 19 feet from the Anthony home. He would call the police and tell them that he had actually walked into this wooded area to relieve himself. And as he was walking in the woods, he would come across this garbage bag. And around this garbage bag, he would find little bones laying about, showing that animals had gotten to this garbage bag far before he did. And he would peek inside this garbage bag, and something would resemble that of a tiny skull. He would quickly take a stick out and stick it into the empty eye socket of this tiny skeletal object and pick it up, and it indeed been a small skull of a child. The police would quickly find this evidence, and not only would they find the skeletal remains, they would also find duct tape and a small Winnie the Pooh blanket. Out of all the skeletal remains, the one remain that would be the most intact would be the skull. And they would later find out it is because whoever had taken this person had actually taken duct tape and wrapped it around the nose and the mouth of around the face of the person. They would send it over to the forensic team to do DNA testing, and unfortunately, it would test positive for Kaylee Anthony. So the police would get a warrant so they could investigate the Anthony home that was 19 feet away where they found Kaylee Anthony.